Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nikki Rude, and I'm the Children, Youth, and Family Ministry Coordinator for St. Andrews and have been since last August. It means a lot to me to be able to share my faith journey with you. I was raised in a small town in southwest Missouri called Nevada, which is also where I met my husband, Chris. He's from International Falls, but he was working for 3M in my hometown. We were set up on a blind date in 1996. 10 months later, we were married, and the rest, as they say, is history. We have 3 pretty awesome kids, Madison, Isaac, and Catherine, and we also have Patrick, our wonderful son-in-law, thanks to Madison's good taste in men. I have been told that I should write a book someday about my life because it has definitely not been boring. However, for the sake of time, I will highlight a few of the moments that have shaped me as a Christian. But first, I need to give you a little background. My mom, Carol, and my dad, Mike, got married immediately following his return from Vietnam, and I was born in 1973. My dad was a Marine, and he was on the front line for much of his time there. He rarely spoke of it, but he did tell me at one of his few moments of vulnerability that his best friend had died in his arms. That kind of horror leaves marks. He had a hard time acclimating back to civilian life once home, and my parents' marriage suffered the consequences. They divorced when I was almost 2. After that, I saw my dad on visitations, but his behavior had gotten him into some trouble with the law, and so my mother had understandably gotten nervous about my time being spent with him. So when I was 8, my mom remarried, and my dad decided to give up his parental rights to me, and my stepfather, Terry, adopted me. I didn't see my dad again until I was 18. Now I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to it in a second. When growing up, I attended the Methodist Church in Nevada. There's very few Lutheran churches there, I promise. Mostly with my Grandma Lena and my Grandpa Tom. I idolized my grandma, and to this day I still do my very best to emulate her. She was confident and faith-filled. I never heard her complain about anything or anyone, and she and my grandpa had that kind of marriage that people just wish for. She was always smiling, except for when I goofed off at church. And even then, she didn't have to say anything. She just had this look. Eyebrows up, and so I can't even do it. You only had to receive it once before understanding that this extremely sweet and loving woman would make you wish you were never born. See, I didn't always do a great job paying attention in church, and I could often be found playing hangman up in the balcony with friends, and therefore I would get the look. Growing up, I really enjoyed my church life, but I just didn't get it. I had the faith my grandparents told me to have, and I didn't really question it. Here's the gist of what I got growing up in church. God was there for me. Jesus died for my sins. You have to wear uncomfortable dresses to church at Christmas and Easter. You do your very best to make grumpy people at church smile, and you try really hard not to embarrass your grandparents. Looking back, there were definitely seeds of faith that were planted, but I hadn't really started my own journey yet. As it is with many people, it wasn't until I was at my lowest that I realized all that my faith had to offer. Now, back to that pin I was talking about, my dad. When I was 18, I received a call from my paternal grandmother, Granny Pat, who I also hadn't seen in 10 years. She wanted to meet, and so we did. It was weird. It felt like I was inserting myself into someone else's past. She told me that my dad wanted to see me again, and that he had remarried, and he had 2 kids. I had a brother and a sister. As an only child that always dreamed of having siblings, that was music to my ears. Their names were Scotty and Sarah. Scotty was 9 and Sarah was 6. Also, by that time, my stepfather had left, and it was just my mom and I again. The last thing I wanted to do was hurt my mom with my decision. I didn't really know what to do, so I did something I hadn't done in a while, and I prayed. I asked God to help me know what to do. I was afraid of hurting my mom by reuniting, but I knew that I'd regret and wonder what might have been if I didn't. The prayer was like, God, it's Nikki, and yeah, I haven't talked to you in a while, and I'm really sorry. By the time I do talk to you, it's about me wanting something, but I really need something, so can you help me? Yeah, thanks. Love, Nikki. Amen. I never really felt that I received a sign, but I decided to go for it anyway. I agreed to go mini golfing with my dad's new family. It went well, so not long after that, we made more plans, and before I knew it, I was being referred to as the oldest and going to visit for long weekends. My dad hadn't really confronted his past and various mistakes, but it seemed to me that he was just trying to forget and start fresh. I was cautious, but I was also glad to be a part of his past that he didn't want to forget. I even lived with him for a while attending college. Now that was interesting. My dad had never parented a grown child and was obviously a little wary of the prospect and therefore put a 10 p.m. curfew on me. I was 20. Looking back, I am so grateful for the year that I had with him, though, curfew or not. One thing that I haven't mentioned yet is that was right around the same time as I went through my wild phase. After I moved out of my dad's house and into an apartment with a friend who I went to school with, I started dating a guy that was definitely not a good choice. He was a Marine and a model. Yes, both. Should have known. And I was swayed by his good looks and his charm. After a few months of dating, however, his charm fell away, and all I was left with was a very abusive boyfriend, and I didn't think I deserved any better. After 9 months of dating and some knockdown, drag-out fights, he left. 7 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. I can't explain how scared, devastated, overwhelmed, and alone I felt. I decided to move home and be with my mom. After about 3 months, I finally worked up the courage to tell my dad. I drove to their house, and I had dinner with them. I told my stepmom first so that she could help me tell him, but it didn't go well. He asked me to leave, and he didn't speak to me for the next 6 months, and he forbid the kids to contact me too. Needless to say, I was once again devastated, and I felt that I had screwed everything up and disappointed him in the process. So I was 21, pregnant, and living back at home with my mom, which wasn't ideal, but I was so thankful to have my mom and my grandma walk through it with me. The ex-boyfriend didn't want anything to do with the baby, and I didn't want him to do anything with the baby either, so it was just us, 3 generations of women, and one on the way. And a bit of foreshadowing as to what my life with my oldest, Madison, would be like, she came 3 weeks late. You know. As I'm sure all the parents in the room can understand, looking into her eyes the first time was when I just really knew that all my grandmother had taught me about God had to be true. She was perfect, and I vowed to bring her up in the church as I was. I called my stepmom just to let them know that the baby and I were okay, and I was extremely surprised when 2 hours later, she and my dad entered the hospital room with Scotty and Sarah in tow, holding a bunch of flowers and a gift. Dad was quiet, but he bent down and he kissed me on the forehead. And then he took Madison into his arms, and the disappointment and the anger melted away as he looked at her. 3 months after I had Madison was when I was set up on that blind date I told you about in the beginning. Was definitely not looking to get involved with anyone that stage, but God knew better than I did. And that blind date turned out to have a second and a third date as well. And everyone teased me that he was just trying to get to Madison by marrying me, but Chris was exactly what it was missing in my life. We had only been dating for 2 months when Father's Day rolled around. Madison was 5 months old, and I decided that she and I would drive down to see my dad for the weekend. My brother had been baptized 2 weeks prior. He actually opted to be dunked in a river. But I had to work and I couldn't attend. Dad wasn't very happy with me, so I definitely wanted to make it up by being there for Father's Day. However, the night before we were to leave, Madison started running a fever and was obviously not feeling well. I took her to the doctor the next morning and learned that she had a nasty ear infection. I made the decision to not go to my dad's and instead go visit the following weekend when she felt better, and he understood. After a long weekend with a sick infant, I left Madison with my mom that Monday so that I could go back to work. When I got home for lunch, I picked Madison up out of the crib, and I was just getting ready to feed her when I noticed the look on my mom's face. Something was very wrong. She asked me for the baby and then told me to sit down. She said Gail, my stepmother, had called, and there had been an accident. Saturday night around midnight, my sister awoke with a migraine Gail took her to the ER, and Dad stayed home so they wouldn't have to wake up Scotty. When they returned home at 6 a.m., my dad and my brother were dead. The water heater in the basement had been leaking, which we later found out was why Sarah had the migraine. But while they were at the hospital, the leak grew into a full-blown breakdown, and carbon monoxide had filled the house. They found my dad in the crawl position on his way to Scotty's room, but he never made it. As my mom relayed this story to me as she had heard it, my world spun. My dad was 55 years old, and my brother was 12. How could this happen? I was devastated. And as a new mom, to think of Gail losing her child was more than my mind could handle. Chris and my mom stayed by my side that first day. I didn't want Chris to have to see me cry since we were still a relatively new couple, but he just annoyingly followed me around everywhere I went so that I wouldn't leave the room crying. It was very annoying. The next day, Chris and Madison and I left for Dad's to help plan the funeral. Double funeral. My sister understood what was happening, but as a 9-year-old, she didn't fully grasp the situation. And my stepmother did her best to keep her control, but understandably was having trouble coping. I wanted to be there to help, and there was a voice on a loop in my head saying, "Why, God?" But I just pushed it away and tried to ignore it. I didn't really want to talk to God at that moment. I wasn't angry with God, I just didn't understand. In my still immature faith, I pictured God as a being who reigned on high, having full control over who lived and who died, and in my mind, he didn't save them when he could have. When it came time for the funeral, my dad was in an open coffin on the left side of the church, and Scotty was on the right. They had dressed Scotty in his Cub Scout uniform. I had Madison on my lap, and I held my sister's hand. So many people came to the funeral, including Scotty's entire class from school. I watched as one of his classmates, a little girl, crying hysterically, tried to crawl into the coffin with him and had to be carried out by her dad. Somehow, though, amidst all this chaos, the minister's voice started getting through my scattered thoughts. He said something that sticks with me to this day, and I have said to others many times since. Time doesn't heal all wounds. That's a lie. It helps them to hurt less, but wounds like these leave scars, and we will never not be sad when we think of them. His honesty meant a lot to me, and he was right. After the service, we went to the cemetery. Double visitation, double funeral, double burial. I sat with Gail and Sarah as the minister started the committal service. Chris had taken Madison because she was getting fussy and went to sit on a blanket under a big oak tree a little ways away. I was listening to the minister's words, but I was watching Chris and Madison. I was watching her laughing as he was playing peekaboo with her. To hear a child's laugh in the distance amidst the immense grief that was around me felt as if God was shining down and letting me know it was going to be okay. The amazing tragedy of losing my dad and brother on Father's Day weekend nonetheless was huge, but it dawned on me that there was grace amidst the grief. I was supposed to be there with my 5-month-old daughter, sleeping in the basement, just feet away from the water heater, but we couldn't go due to her ear infection. Sarah awoke with a migraine before the pipe burst. Otherwise, she and her mother would have most definitely suffered the same ending as my dad and brother. My brother had a profound moment in a cold river being baptized just 2 weeks before he died. I was estranged from my dad for 10 years, but God's grace helped us to reunite and know each other again before his death. As time passed, I came to realize how much my faith was shaped on that weekend. I never blamed God, and I was never really mad at God either. I just didn't understand, and I still have trouble wrapping my head around it. God became very visible to me at that time, though. I realized that just because I couldn't see God didn't mean I didn't see God shining through others. I saw God through the minister that walked with us that day. I saw God through the strength that Gail somehow mustered. I saw God in my mom as she held me that first day. I saw God in Chris as he played peekaboo with Madison under the tree. I saw God in Madison as she unknowingly became the anchor to which I held. There have been many moments over the years since that I've seen God being so abundant and active in my life. Having my son Isaac and my daughter Catherine definitely rank at the top. Promise. Feeling God's call to serve the youth is a gift I can't even put into words. When I thought I was finished in youth ministry, God said, "Oh yeah, you want to make a bet?" And here I am, and I'm the happiest I've been in a long time. There have been times that I wondered if Dad would be proud of me and how I turned out. I think he would be. I think he is. There's a sign in my daughter's room that says, "If you stumble, make it part of the dance." I fall down a lot, both figuratively and literally. But I try my best to keep getting up and persevering. The people in my life, both past and present, along with my faith, has shaped me into this weird, loving, messy, completely imperfect person that you see before you. And I am so grateful. Thank you.